Thank you so much, Everett, for the kind introduction. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here at today's summit. This is a topic near and dear to my heart, and I'm looking forward to sharing Consensus Health's ideas with you and to an engaging audience Q&A segment toward the end. Just a little bit about myself by way of additional introduction. I also serve in a volunteer leadership role across 3 nonprofit organizations that focus at the intersection of blockchain, AI, and the healthcare and life sciences industry. I'm the chair of the HIMSS Blockchain Task Force for the last 2 years. That's the Health Information Management Systems Society, if anyone is already familiar. I chair a standard in development at IEEE focused on the intersection of blockchain and AI in healthcare and life sciences. And I chair the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance's Health Interest Group. All of these things comes together because, as you'll learn in this talk, our work is really focused at ecosystem level engagement to break down data silos and achieve the vision and aim of artificial intelligence in our industry, along with the learning health system. So moving forward, what I'm going to be talking about today is going to begin with the art of the possible, talking about how federated analytics actually work and new capabilities made possible through advanced privacy preservation. We'll be talking about the implications for all of that for research data integrity, and the development of trustworthy AI in the digital therapeutics field. And lastly, looking at how all of that forms the basis of a new health data economy that can radically drive and accelerate DTX adoption and scalability. So first, some context. For those of you not familiar with the blockchain space, which we view as foundational, integral technology to achieve this vision, we work in something called the Ethereum ecosystem. Ethereum is the, after Bitcoin, the second largest public blockchain, but that term carries a lot of different meanings. And context for you is that it actually has 3 definitions. It's an open source protocol. It's an open source protocol implemented into something called the Ethereum mainnet, and it is also a cryptocurrency that is used to power that infrastructure. That infrastructure is neutral, public, without jurisdiction. It has no stock, it has no CEO, it has no board. It functions through a miracle of behavioral economics and has become as decentralized as the internet itself. In fact, it's reasonable to think of it as the emerging next generation of the internet. This comes from a technology community referred to as Web3. And unlike Bitcoin, Ethereum was designed from the foundation to be a global world computer that could address currency scenarios like Bitcoin, but really look at shared computation for humanity across any domain of knowledge or discipline. And I've been very focused on converging this technology with AI and advanced privacy preservation to meet the unique compliance, bioethical, privacy, identity, cybersecurity, and bioethics challenges in our industry. Who we are a commercially independent venture-backed spinoff from a company called Consensus that is one of the largest pure play blockchain companies. We have taken that family of technologies and converged it with other emerging technologies to form something that we call data integrity and learning networks. This is really a new class of industry utility that has blockchain at its foundation, but is certainly much more than only blockchain. We have a technology platform called Elevated Compute that, when implemented, forms these data integrity and learning networks. And our organization is focused on veterans and their families as the first populations that we seek to serve. So this audience is likely not very familiar with what's going on in blockchain and healthcare and what would it have to do with digital therapeutics. And that's really at the heart of the opportunity that we see here. These are an example of 5 of the largest consortia in the healthcare and life sciences space, none of which were formed for the purpose of accelerating digital therapeutic development or commercialization. However, Something critically important to note is that these infrastructures and ones like them, such as what Consensus Health will be creating with data integrity and learning networks, can be reframed and reconsidered as a massive value creation engine for the field of digital therapeutics. Each of these consortia has a different organizational structure. It has different ownership interests, different legal jurisdictions, different ways of financially and operationally addressing the needs, the shared needs of the individual stakeholders. But as you'll notice, many of you in the audience have participation from your organizations in these endeavors, though they are not specifically focused on digital therapeutics. Our hypothesis and what we're driving in the industry is that this category, this class of infrastructure, is massively relevant to the future of digital therapeutics. One point I'd like to make about all of these consortia is, even though this is thought of as bleeding edge technology, we're really at the point in this industry where the technology itself is well established, and the experimental nature of these organizations really live at the business level, at compliance, at legal, at who underwrites the risk, how is it capitalized, all of those kinds of considerations. And there's been just massive engineering work across all of these organizations, as well as others, that have closed out many of the last remaining risks and barriers to adoption of the technology. This has been going on, steadily, really, in one form or another since about 2016. So thinking about how would a network like this be used to drive the future of digital therapeutics? Thinking about it at a very high level, imagine our health economy that is assembled into different kinds of networks and collaborations. Let's imagine those networks and collaborations are data integrity and learning networks, which means that enterprise data donors, enterprise contributors are able to share information for the analytical use without exposing it or exchanging it with one another. So essentially, we can protect the privacy of enterprises, providers, payers, pharma companies, et cetera, while enabling the analytical use on a shared basis of their data. Similarly, in several jurisdictions around the world, including in the United States, increasingly patients will be empowered to take custody of copies of their health and health relevant data under infrastructures that they control. Once that data is under the patient's custody, the legal claims on that data shift, the compliance parameters on that data shift, and we have the opportunity to perform compute on that data where it resides under the patient's custody without having to expose it or change it, or share it with the other parties. Something critically important to keep in mind is that today we are, for compliance and ethical reasons, we run separate infrastructures to operate mainstream medicine, clinical research, and public health. Each digital therapeutic during its validation phase and commercially also maintains distinct infrastructure in the cloud and locally under very tight regulatory parameters. In that, all of those categories of data are either de-identified, which generally strips a great deal of the data quality out of it by removing 18 fields, the longitudinality of the data is lost, et cetera, or fully identified. Each of the transactions around those data and access to that data depends on this identified or de-identified scenario. And it leads our industry down a path where substantial capital is repeatedly invested to develop data sets for different research and commercial purposes that are really either single use or limited in the number of times they can be used. In the future of this infrastructure, individual data subjects, patients, will be able to obfuscate their identity while keeping the data structure intact. And with the fine-grained consent of the data subject, they can later downstream unlock that information. So for example, let's imagine in the current state, maybe de-identified data for site selection is purchased from a CRO. A particular site is selected to run a study. Then initiation and enrollment starts over because you can't go back and re-identify the patients that were originally used analytically in the site selection process. In this future scenario, you would have the original data set that was activated would be fully identified, but identity obfuscated, identity locked, unlockable only by the data subject with a fine-grained consent persisted to a blockchain layer, which completely changes the trust parameters on that consent, the transparency of that consent, the immutability of that consent, and the ability to append metadata relevant to the contractual structures and the jurisdiction in which it's applied. So this ability to work with identity obfuscated data instead of multiple separate pools of de-identified and re-identified data is one of the core advantages to accelerating the research process and also driving real-world evidence in commercialization endeavors. So as we think about these collaborations of where we're going from an industry where every enterprise is a separate data silo. In fact, typically every enterprise is many separate data silos, but let's just, for the sake of simplicity, believe that every enterprise is a single data silo. And we use health information exchanges, we use various kinds of legacy integrations to move data, copies of data from place to place to make our industry function. By moving to private blockchain networks, so these are enterprise private networks, we can now incentivize collaboration on data at rest without centralizing that data into enormous data lakes or data warehouses. Essentially, what this means is that inside this construct here, inside a private blockchain network, we can perform analytics by bringing the analytical model to where the data resides instead of bringing the data to the center somehow and performing analytics there. So this data decentralization for analytics and machine learning effectively means that the artificial intelligences that inform inference and prediction and early intervention in the context of digital therapeutics can be trained collaboratively across a wide and growing array of participating enterprise data donors without ever having to take custody of that data or even normalize it, worry about de-identifying it, and so on and so forth. So this private blockchain network concept that you see here, it is in effect a new class of shared IT infrastructure where some number of enterprises with a common aim is effectively abstracting a portion of what they do in their IT departments up into a shared infrastructure. And in that shared infrastructure, both competitively sensitive data can be preserved, as well as patient data with privacy implications can be protected. But this new shared IT infrastructure is a major advancement forward. However, it does create really a larger data silo because the benefits of the participation in the private blockchain network really accrue to the enterprise participants in that network. It doesn't intrinsically mean that you could span multiple networks in any scalable way. So our vision involves not just collaborating to break down data silos among some number of participants in the formation of private blockchain networks, but rather to use neutral public infrastructure that is scalable, stable, very, very secure from a cybersecurity perspective, and currently moving hundreds of billions of dollars of economic volume around the world as the bridge and mechanism by which these private blockchain networks can be federated, essentially move to a network of network model that are federated via the public infrastructure of the Ethereum mainnet. So just to clarify, we're talking about private networks that are bridged and made interoperable and discoverable via a neutral public infrastructure that we conceive of as the next generation of the internet itself. The protocol that runs these things is very similar. The implementations are different. So we are able to achieve compliance with healthcare and life sciences, very, very intricate and complex and jurisdiction specific rules and enforcement parameters. So as we move forward with this, I want to talk about the specific technologies that are made possible inside one of these networks. So if we think what's inside the box, if you will, of one of these private networks, and how does it work with interfacing with a neutral mainnet, and how can this facilitate massive orders of magnitude increases in data availability for digital therapeutics research translation, and real world evidence in commercialization. So we view this technology that we call elevated compute as a new foundation for the future of digital therapeutics. This foundation is implemented in enterprise collaborations, like I was just describing. That's the enterprise version of this, and person-centered infrastructures, and that's the person in the center taking custody of health and health relevant information about them. Critically, this technology is in no way competitive with digital therapeutics that are in market. Instead, in so much that those digital therapeutics benefit from cross-sectional analytics of wider data set than that is governed specifically within the digital therapeutic, such as real world evidence, EHR data, wearables data, remote telemetry data, other social determinant data that would influence maybe personalization of education, engagement, and empowerment activities. All of that data can now be cryptographically locked so that it retains clinical utility. Unlike past generations of what were referred to as personal health records, if that data could be modified by the data subject, it ceases to be clinically relevant for a healthcare provider, and certainly from a research data perspective. In this new model of cryptography that we have available and the data decentralization, we can put the data under patients' custody while locking it cryptographically so that they can curate the data in an append-only model, and they can identify waste, fraud, and abuse. They can engage in their care in a very active way, but they can't modify the underlying data other than appending curation activities. This person-centered infrastructure, we believe, will be the new foundation, the new back end for digital therapeutics at an industry level, and that individual digital therapeutics will be able to move through their research cycles much more quickly and facilitate a movement to both decentralized trials and critically more adaptive trial design for quicker iteration as we move further and further toward our shared industry vision that all of us are working toward around personalization and precision. So the person-centered version of this will be reaching consumers beginning in 2022 through a number of different organizing principles of our data integrity and learning networks. One organizing principle is by population or cohort, in which case, if there were a digital therapeutic provider who had a population-oriented go-to-market, then that can be a research and commercialization engine. We also organize based on disease state or condition, so that digital therapeutics can form the anchor around which we assemble data integrity and learning networks from the providers who are most frequently prescribing that particular digital therapeutic and aligning with those healthcare provider organizations in market access and commercialization strategy. We also are organizing by geography, something called health utility grids that that there'll be more information in 2022 about. But this too is a data integrity and learning network that can form a back-end data foundation for digital therapeutics. Something that needs to be discussed is what we call provable privacy. In our industry, we're all rightfully subject to robust and varying by jurisdiction privacy law. Generally, our compliance approach tends to be, for lack of better term, paperwork driven and structurally driven. We are not able to cryptographically enforce or prove that we have been compliant with a wide range of regulations, including privacy law, but certainly not limited to privacy law. The provability of compliance and the automation and enforceability of rules that establish compliance are integral value propositions to this new infrastructure, such that in the future the evidentiary production will be making regulators and investigators making available to them infrastructures like this so that they can simply use the native aspects of the technology to independently verify how compliance was enforced and that it was enforced. And that includes, importantly, privacy. So on the enterprise side, when we describe federated analytics, just to be clear, that means being able to run a query that is executed across many enterprise organizations where the data was not shared or decentralized or centralized, and the derived or aggregate findings are shared among the participants. This provides things like privacy-preserving benchmarking for provider organizations who want to be able to compare their performance in a disease state or condition with the industry or some subset of the industry, certainly without centralizing or disclosing the entirety of their data. This can be used to optimize quality improvement programs at a population level, as well as for federated clinical decision support that can be directly integrated with DTX patient-facing and provider-facing workflows. Secure inference is an important piece here, where often prediction it plays a central role in early intervention and uses AI algorithms in order to make predictions. We have the ability to protect the actual code base of those AI algorithms while collaborating on their training, and to protect the input parameters and the output parameters coming in and out of those prediction operations. So there's a wide range of infrastructure considerations about how all of this works, but I wanted to give you a big picture view of how this can be a new foundation for the digital therapeutics infrastructure. Last but not least, I want to quickly touch on the idea of a new data economy that is fully financialized and importantly, economically inclusive of the data subjects. And we view this new infrastructure for digital therapeutics as unblocking the potential of AI at scale, driving both precision and personalization agenda and faster miracles with accelerating and decentralized and adaptive trial designs being supported. Just quickly running through the high points here. Right now, sourcing data pipelines to train machine learning models is very expensive, slow, sometimes so slow it's impossible to source the data. These data integrity and learning networks can open up access to orders of magnitude more data than could ever have been centralized in order to achieve the same thing. So this federated first approach to AI improvement also addresses issues in the diversity of the data and the implications from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, and problems with embedding bias in the training data into machine learning models. This allows us to source and access far broader and more diverse data sets for training purposes. When data pipeline is sourced, generally there are low or poor issues with data provenance, the integrity of the data, and this is a model for radically enriching data in this set as well, because we will be applying new classes of metadata that allows us to use use that data differently. Packaging data for transactions in something called non-fungible tokens is a critical part of how the crypto economics of this, we believe, plays into the future. And that thinking about data leasing apparatus instead of purchasing, buying, and selling, we predict is going to be an important transactional mechanic that's distinct from how it's done today. The role of the Ethereum mainnet really drives interoperability among these private blockchain networks that, when assembled in total globally, completely change the data infrastructure for the industry. And finally, our last two abilities to address the identity issue at the patient level and facilitate blockchain provable fine-grained consents for the analytical use or exchange of data, both in research and in clinical constructs, is critically important. And we have the bones, the skeleton in place already in terms of the market architecture for a new, transparent, and economically inclusive data economy. So with that, we'll go to the audience Q&A, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Heather. There are a number of questions, and we only have a couple of minutes here, so I'll get to a number of these. So Tracy asks, can the owner of the health record see who is accessing it, how often, etc.?
Yes, Tracy, thanks for that great question. The notion here is that the health record that is assembled under the patient's custody directly versus the health record that lives in a provider organization. So if we're talking about the record that they've pulled down into into an infrastructure they custody, then the answer is yes, absolutely. Only that accessing and use that they've provided explicit consent to would be facilitated, and they would be able to see exactly what they'd consented to and exactly what had already happened.
Great. Maybe time for one more. Let's see. How is maybe actually, let's go with where would a digital therapeutics company start thinking about integrating blockchain into its process and product? You touched on this a bit, but it would be great to kind of dive a little bit deeper in the short period of time we have here.
Sure. So the way to think about it is that a blockchain network is a model improvement and research and deployment scenario that is distinct from the way it is done today. And in that scenario, there are a range of advantages. So blockchain networks, let's imagine you have a digital therapeutic to predict and intervene in suicidality, just hypothetically. Blockchain networks can be formed around your leading research institutions that were involved in validating that digital therapeutic and activate their patients that providers are prescribing the digital therapeutics to into the person-centered version of that infrastructure. So if you think about it, a twin version between some number of enterprises and people coming together. So organizations like Consensus Health, but not only us, can do the business, legal, economic organization of one of these networks in order for the digital therapeutics provider to achieve those aims.
Great, thanks. So, and I think we are breaking for lunch now. So, Heather, thanks so much for a really engaging discussion and and very timely timely presentation as well in a year where I think Dogecoin was, I just heard this morning, a top search on Google. It was in the top 5 even for most search terms in Google. So very, very timely in one sense, and also timely in the sense of decentralized clinical studies becoming very much the norm. So thank you for this presentation. I'm sure many people will be following up with you, and thanks for the time.
Thank you very much, Everett. And thank you, everyone. It was an honor to be here.